You're listening to Back to Us Radio on the Back to Us Network.
Who have I become? 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 Who have I become?
Good evening, Strong Stance listeners. This is your host, Eli Strong. Welcome to another episode of The Strong Stance. Our topic tonight is a somber one, but it is also an incredibly important one because for all the advancements that the transgender community has seen over the last couple of years, there are still staggering statistics of discrimination and oppression that our community faces on a daily basis. We face employment and housing discrimination, the outright denial of adequate health care or the coverage thereof, bullying, suicide, and murder at alarming rates. At the time of this taping, there have been 20 identified trans women and gender nonconforming people murdered in the United States in 2015, all but a few of whom were trans women of color. Here's a list of those individuals: Poppy Edwards, Lamia Beard, Ty Underwood, Yasmin Payne, Taja DeJesus, Penny Proud, Brian Golick, Christina Gomez-Rainwald, Keisha Blige, Maya Hall, London Chanel, Mercedes Williamson, Ashton O'Hara, India Clark, Casey Haggard, Shade Schuler, Amber Monroe, Candace Capri, Alicia Walker, and Tamara Dominguez. On this episode, I have three incredible guests joining me to discuss these devastating losses, the violence plaguing our community, and where we go from here. The first of our guests is Tracy McDaniel. For those avid listeners of The Strong Stance, Tracy's name is not a stranger's name to you. Tracy is a transgender advocate and author motivated by a strong desire to ensure that all transgender and gender nonconforming people also receive equality, justice, and human rights protection. She is the founder and CEO of the Juxtaposed Center for Transformation in Atlanta. In 2007, Tracy became the first transgender person invited to deliver a keynote speech at the annual Martin Luther King Jr. birthday celebration march and rally. She has lobbied Congress, served on the Atlanta Police Department's LGBT Advisory Board, Mayor Reed's Working Group on Prostitution, is a vetted trainer for the U.S. Department of Justice, has several awards to her credit, and is currently a board of director for Transgender Health and Education Alliance, or THEA. Tracy, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for inviting me for this important conversation, Eli.
Our next guest is Cheryl Courtney Evans. Cheryl is an outspoken advocate for human rights focusing on the transgender community. A native of Kansas City, Missouri, she came to Atlanta in 1979. She found a place with La Gender Inc., an Atlanta transgender support group, where she received certification as a transgender peer counselor through the United States Conference of Mayors Grant Program. In 2007, Cheryl founded Transgender Individuals Living Their Truth, becoming the first transgender support and advocacy organization in Atlanta to serve both transgender men and women. Since its inception, TILT achieved incorporation and has served over 500 transgender individuals, providing moral support and general trans advocacy, as well as referral to a variety of resources and legal information around transgender rights. Ms. Courtney Evans provides cultural competency trainings for organizations involved in improving their diversity and employment practices, and she is involved with the organizing of individuals working to establish transgender emergency and transitional housing for the greater Atlanta area. Cheryl, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me, Eli.
And our final of the three guests is Sasha Alexander. Sasha is a Black South Asian trans organizer, artist, facilitator, and healer who has been working at the intersections of community, media, racial, economic, and gender justice for over 15 years. Sasha is the membership director at the Sylvia Rivera Law Project and works to uplift the leadership and collective liberation of low-income trans, gender nonconforming, and intersex people, specifically people of color and formerly incarcerated people. The Sylvia Rivera Law Project works to guarantee that all people are free to self-determine their gender identity, regardless of race or class, without harassment and discrimination. Sasha is also the founder of Black Trans Media and uses the pronouns he, she, and they, and asks that you mix it up. Sasha, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's an honor to be here with these amazing folks and yourself to talk about this and honor our community, so thank you.
Absolutely. So, you know, I have to say that trying to talk about this show and trying to come up with show notes on what we're going to talk about was quite possibly one of the most difficult shows to prep for, because really I just kind of wanted a giant bullhorn and to start yelling, "Stop killing trans women." And obviously that's not the end-all, be-all of the discussion, and simply shouting that is not necessarily going to stop what's happening. So, before we get started, I just want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us for this conversation, because I feel like it's incredibly important. But I want to start this discussion with kind of how did we get here? We had 14 murders, I believe, in the U.S. of trans women last year, and we still have a few months left in this year, and we're already hitting 20 individuals. And so I'd like to hear from each of you about how you think we got here. Maybe how do the discriminatory policies and microaggressions that we face as a community lead to this culture of violence for the transgender and gender nonconforming community? So, Tracy, I don't know if you want to tackle that first, or if somebody else wants to jump in.
Well, what I'd like to say first, Eli, is I think it's very important to give some background, some knowledge of what's really happening, and I'd like to start with a quote, and it's according to the Southern Law Center's 2015 report on violence against transgender people. During the first 2 months of 2015, transgender women of color were murdered at a rate of almost one per week in the United States alone.
Yeah.
That is utterly ridiculous. And how did we get here? I don't know. I'm not sure. So I don't know how to answer that question right now. Maybe I can come back to that.
Excuse me, Eli.
Yes.
I'd like to say that we didn't get here. We've always been here. Mm-hmm. The situation has always been one of emergency.
Right.
What has happened is, with the advent of so much technological communication, is similar to the police brutality. Now that there's so many videotapes, there's so much laptop, there's so much internet communication, this added information is being disseminated at a more readily accessible rate.
Yeah.
So that we are hearing about these deaths at a much more alarming rate than we would have back when we had to depend on the news media to hit the screen or the radio.
Mm. Yeah,
you
and
understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is Sasha Alexander, and I completely agree with what you shared 100%. I feel like we didn't get here anytime soon. We've always been here, but part of what's changed is the way folks communicate over media and technology, and the way that we're able to better document that. I do think we're still way under-reporting in terms of definitely the violence and definitely the murders that are happening. And I do think that's right on, that it is similar to police brutality, that these things have always been happening in communities of color, black communities, but whether or not, folks are more aware, there are waves. Movements are made up of moments. And so it even makes me think of the Trans Day of Remembrance, that at some point became, kind of a source of empowerment for the community to remember people. But many people don't know that was originated when Rita Hester, a black trans woman on the West Coast, was killed and murdered. And many, people have been forgotten, within the community and within the larger LGBT community. So I think, how did we get here, is definitely our history of policing, a lack of health care, a lack of access to education and employment, and those things are definitely not new.
Right. And I absolutely agree that not only is it the advent of the technological advances, the speed with which we get information. I think that another thing that's happening is that because there are more independent resources for us to get that information, right? There are more blogs for us to get information, that we are learning more about people, not only because at the speed that we are, but also because while a large part of the national, press does misgender a lot of these victims, you have a voice in having like a blog or being able to write for other organizations where you can say, no, this person was not just a random person that got murdered. This was a trans person. This was a hate crime. This was a woman, not a man. And I think that increases the amount that we see it, because it's very easy for murders to kind of fall under the radar. If, sure, the news told us that this man was killed, when in reality it was a woman that they are just not respecting who that person actually was. And I think that having some of that turning point also shows us these numbers. They feel like they're getting higher, even though we all know that trans people, particularly trans women and trans women of color, have been murdered from jump. I mean, and I agree with you, Sasha, that a lot of things that happen are because of some of these policies and this lack of health care and things like that. And I don't know if either of you or if any of you have this feeling that, so many people talk about how microaggressions are just that they're micro, that they're small, that, for the most part, minority communities should just get over microaggressions, that, just because someone doesn't use your correct pronoun or just because someone doesn't adequately represent you in the media, that doesn't lead to very violent consequences. And I personally extremely disagree with that. I feel like that microaggressions and discriminatory policies other our community, which, for a lot of people gives them a pass to think of trans people as subhuman, and therefore their life is not as important, and therefore a murder of a trans person is not nearly as important as a murder of a cisgender person. I don't know if any of you feel that way or if you disagree. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Eli, when you said there's a lack of respect. There's a lack of respect for transgender people, period. And until society sees us as human beings also, then I don't know how we're going to bring this change. It's utterly ridiculous that people are dying on a daily basis, practically, and nothing is being done. And I'm just at the point where I'm just outraged about it. And I think personally that we should start some kind of trans act up movement where we discuss it, where we're shutting down stuff and interrupting, the daily activities. Because if that doesn't happen, then we're going to continue to add names to this list. I'm just fed up with it. It's just like it's a normal occurrence where we see a trans person is being murdered, burned, or decapitated, and no one is outraged about it. They're just posting this stuff on Facebook, but what is being done?
Right. Yeah. I agree.
And sorry, this is Sasha. I would love to add I totally agree to that, and I think there's nothing more minimalizing than calling your oppression a microaggression. Right. I always tell people there is nothing micro about racism. There is nothing micro about transphobia and the actions that ultimately lead to our deaths, whether it's snapping a photo, tapping your friend. These are the things that get people killed. So to me, it's completely minimalizing to the trauma that we have faced, to say that that these are small occurrences or small aggressions. And I, for one, can't even stand the term for that reason.
Yeah, well, there's nothing small about people dying.
And I like to say that just a simple thing is accepting the misgendering and mispronunciation of and mispronouns regarding our demographic plays into a disrespect and devaluing of our community, and it discredits us, and it promotes an attitude of less than care for us, and adds to the attitude of the police department with regard to investigations of crimes against us, as well as feeding into the meme of she deserves what